Red Bull just did something that could decide the championship before the first race even starts. Days before the Australian Grand Prix, they quietly unlocked almost half a second per lap with a Ford-powered upgrade package that nobody saw coming. Half a second. In modern Formula One, that is not an improvement. That is domination. Over 2,000 laps completed in testing. 0 major failures. 12 degrees cooler engine temperatures. Over 340 kilometers per hour without drag reduction system. And that was before the Melbourne upgrades. New blown diffuser evolution. Completely revised front wing. Refined hybrid deployment mapping. Aero gain stacked on top of thermal efficiency. This is not a small step forward. This is a statement. Because if these numbers are real, Ferrari is in trouble. Mercedes is under pressure. And the Australian Grand Prix could be over by turn 1. But here is what nobody is talking about. One hidden detail inside this Ford engine upgrade changes everything for race pace, and we will break it down step by step. Subscribe now, because if you leave before the end, you will miss the part that explains why the paddock is genuinely worried. Everyone saw the lap times. Almost nobody understood the pattern. Because in Bahrain, Red Bull was not chasing headlines. They were building a foundation. Over 2,000 laps completed across the test. That is not just mileage. That is stress testing at championship level. While other teams searched for one fast lap, Red Bull focused on consistency. Long runs. Heavy fuel. Conservative engine maps. And this is where it gets serious. In Sector 2, the technical section, Verstappen was setting purple mini-sectors using a conservative power mode. Conservative. That means there was more available. Telemetry leaks suggest there was nearly 0.8 still hidden in reserve during certain simulations. 0.8. That is not small. That is strategic concealment. But let us slow this down. Because what really impressed engineers in the paddock was not the speed. It was the degradation curve. On a simulated full race distance, tire drop-off was almost flat. Lap after lap. Minimal performance fall-off. That changes strategy completely. A one-stop strategy becomes viable. Track position becomes easier to control. Pressure shifts to the chasing car. And when you combine that with a power unit running significantly cooler than rivals, you start to see the bigger picture. Cooler engine means stable deployment. Stable deployment means no sudden loss of electrical boost at the end of straights. No clipping. No vulnerability. And in Melbourne, where overtaking windows are limited, top speed without energy cut becomes a weapon. But here is the subtle detail that most people ignored. On day 1, Red Bull lost several hours due to a hydraulic issue. For most teams, that is panic mode. For Red Bull, it was calm. They solved it with a software patch. No replacement of major components. No emergency rebuild. That tells you the architecture is solid. The base concept works. And this is why Block 1 matters so much. Because before we even talk about the Melbourne upgrades, before we analyze the blown diffuser or the revised front wing, you have to understand one thing. The RB22 platform is stable. Stable cars win championships. Not flashy ones. Not unpredictable ones. Stable. And when you start a season with stability, reliability, and hidden pace, you are not reacting to rivals. You are controlling the narrative. But here is the uncomfortable question. If this was Red Bull holding back in testing, what happens when they stop holding back in Australia? Now we move to Melbourne. Because testing form means nothing if you do not evolve. And Red Bull did not sit still. They are bringing what internally is being called Spec 1.1. An aggressive refinement package. Not experimental. Not theoretical. Race ready. Let us begin with the side pods. The blown diffuser version 2 concept is no longer subtle. The undercut is deeper. Sharper. More sculpted toward the rear. But the real magic is how it interacts with the Ford power unit. The hotter exhaust flow and cooling air are being redirected to energize the diffuser throat. That increases rear downforce without increasing drag. More grip. Same straight line speed. That is a dangerous combination at Albert Park. Medium speed corners dominate Sector 2. If rear stability improves there, lap time falls instantly. And simulations suggest a gain of around 0.2 in that section alone. But Red Bull did not stop at rear stability. Because Max made something very clear after testing. The car felt slightly awkward in slow hairpins. Not unstable. Just reluctant to rotate. That is why the front wing has been completely revised. New mainplane geometry. More camber. A more pronounced outboard flap design. The objective is simple. Increase front bite in low-speed entries. Melbourne's opening corners demand precision on turn-in. If the RB22 rotates cleanly there, tire temperatures stay under control. And that feeds directly into long-run dominance. But here is where things connect even deeper. They have added refined airbox winglets and a modified mirror mount design. Small details. Easy to ignore. Yet they clean the turbulent wake traveling to the rear wing. That increases rear stability in crosswinds. And Melbourne is famous for unpredictable gusts coming off the lake. That instability has caught out drivers before. Red Bull wants zero surprises. Now add the diffuser extension. A subtle modification to the rear crash structure allows better airflow expansion. More traction on corner exit. Earlier throttle application. Earlier throttle means more hybrid deployment efficiency. And that links directly back to the Ford mapping upgrade. Stage 2 engine calibration. Optimized for launch phases. Reduced turbo lag. More responsive torque delivery. That could decide the first 50 meters of the race. And in Formula 1, the first 50 meters can decide everything. When you stack these gains together, the numbers become uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. 0.2 from side pods. Around 1.5 from the front wing in slow sections. Additional stability gains from airflow cleanup. Traction improvement at corner exit. Total potential improvement? Close to half a second per lap. Before race 1. And this is the part nobody wants to say out loud. If Red Bull unlocks that full package on Sunday, the Australian Grand Prix might not be about who wins. It might be about who limits the damage. But there is still one variable. Qualifying. Because race pace dominance does not always translate to pole position. And that uncertainty is the only small opening left for Ferrari or Mercedes. The question is whether it is enough. And what happens if it is not? Qualifying might be the only fragile moment. But even that uncertainty hides something deeper. Because Red Bull did not ignore Saturday. They simply approached it differently. In Bahrain, they rarely ran the most aggressive engine modes. They avoided low fuel glory laps. They stayed in conservative maps during purple sector runs. That tells you something. They were protecting data. And more importantly, they were protecting performance. The Ford power unit mapping has layers. Race mode. Energy preservation mode. And what insiders describe as a refined peak deployment setting designed specifically for short bursts. That is crucial in Melbourne. Albert Park rewards traction out of slow corners, yes. But it also punishes poor acceleration onto long straights. If Red Bull can combine their new front-end grip with instant hybrid torque, qualifying may not be as vulnerable as some believe. But here is where it becomes psychological. Ferrari is fast over one lap. Mercedes looks stable. McLaren has improved mechanical grip. All three are chasing the same narrow window. But Red Bull's package is integrated. Front wing feeds rotation. Rotation protects tires. Tires allow aggressive energy deployment. Energy deployment maximizes Ford's thermal efficiency. Thermal efficiency prevents late lap clipping. That is a full circle. And that circle matters most in the final sector of Melbourne. High-speed direction changes. Heavy traction zones. One mistake destroys a lap. If the RB22 remains planted through those transitions, Verstappen does not need perfection. He only needs precision. And that is a dangerous difference. Now think about race start. Stage 2 engine calibration reduces turbo lag. That means when the lights go out, throttle response is immediate. Not delayed. Immediate. If Verstappen launches cleanly, and the new diffuser extension delivers stronger traction, the inside line into turn 1 becomes almost impossible to attack. Control turn 1. Control the pace. Control the tire window. From there, Red Bull does what they do best. They suffocate the race. But let us zoom out even further. Because this is not just about Australia. This is about momentum. The first race shapes narrative. Narrative shapes confidence. Confidence shapes development direction. If Red Bull leaves Melbourne with both performance proof and psychological dominance, rival teams are forced into reactive upgrades. Reactive development is expensive. Reactive development is risky. And risky development creates instability. Red Bull, meanwhile, would already be optimizing from a position of strength. That is how championships quietly begin. Not with drama. With structure. But here is the part we have not fully addressed. What if the estimated half-second gain is conservative? What if Bahrain was not just sandbagging, but concealment? Because when a team completes that level of mileage, shows that level of thermal control, and arrives with a fully validated correlation between wind tunnel, computational fluid dynamics, and track data, they are not experimenting. They are executing. And execution at the first Grand Prix sends a message to the entire grid. So the real tension heading into Australia is not whether Red Bull improved. They clearly did. The tension is whether anyone else improved enough. Because if the gap is already close to half a second per lap in race trim, and if the RB22 truly solved its slow corner weakness, then Sunday in Melbourne might feel less like a season opener, and more like a warning. And that raises one final, uncomfortable thought. If Red Bull is this strong before the development war even begins, what happens when they unleash the next evolution? Now we reach the layer that nobody in the paddock wants to say out loud. Because this is no longer just about upgrades. It is about trajectory. Red Bull is not reacting to the grid. They are setting the direction. And when a team begins a season with reliability, hidden pace, thermal efficiency, aerodynamic correlation, and a fully integrated development package, that is not coincidence. That is alignment. Alignment between chassis, power unit, aerodynamics, and driver confidence. Let us talk about confidence. Max Verstappen did not sound excited after testing. He sounded calm, measured, almost analytical. That is when he is most dangerous. When a driver knows the car underneath him is predictable, stable, responsive, he stops overdriving. He stops forcing lap time. He becomes precise. And precision wins championships. But here is the branch that goes even deeper. The Ford partnership. This is not just branding on the engine cover. This is long-term philosophy. The cooling efficiency we are seeing now is not accidental. Running 12 degrees cooler does not just give straight-line speed. It protects components. It stabilizes deployment curves. It allows engineers to push maps harder without fear. And when engineers are not afraid, they innovate faster. Now connect that to development rhythm. If Red Bull leaves Australia with validation that Spec 1.1 delivers around half a second per lap, then the next upgrade cycle becomes aggressive. Because you develop differently when you are leading. You refine. You optimize. You experiment with less risk. Ferrari and Mercedes would be forced to chase. Chasing creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. Mistakes cost races. But there is another subtle detail. Tire sensitivity. In testing, Verstappen mentioned the tires felt sensitive if pushed aggressively. That sounds like a weakness. But it may not be. Because if the new front wing solves slow corner rotation, the car slides less on entry. Less sliding means less surface overheating. Less overheating means longer stints at peak grip, which circles back to race control. And Melbourne is a control circuit. It punishes instability. It rewards balance. If the RB22 is now balanced front to rear, thermally efficient, traction optimized, and deployment stable, then the margin for error shrinks for everyone else. And here is the uncomfortable scenario for rivals. What if Red Bull wins comfortably in Australia? Not dramatically. Not with fireworks. Just comfortably. That type of victory sends a message far louder than a chaotic one. It says the baseline is strong. It says upgrades are working. It says there is more in reserve. Because remember? They have not shown maximum engine mode publicly. They have not revealed ultimate qualifying trim. They have not been forced to defend under pressure. And when a team has not yet been pushed to the limit, you do not know where the limit actually is. That is the real bombshell. Not the side pods. Not the diffuser. Not even the Ford cooling numbers. The bombshell is that Red Bull might already be operating below their ceiling. We are days away from the first Grand Prix. The lights will go out in Melbourne. Turn 1 will decide track position. Track position will dictate tire life. Tire life will define strategy. Strategy will determine whether anyone can even touch the RB22. And if the early data is accurate, Australia will not reveal whether Red Bull improved. It will reveal how far ahead they already are. So the real question now is not who looks fast on paper. It is this. When the race settles into rhythm on Sunday, will anyone be close enough to challenge? Or will we realize that the championship quietly tilted before it even truly began?